What was my greatest fear as a teenager? I know some common fears are the fear of death, or even more common, the fear of public speaking, maybe the fear of failure. For some, it might be the fear of success, or the fear of rejection, or many other fears. But my fear was quite a unique one. And no, it wasn't the fear of getting bullied. Now, in high school, I went to a selective high school, so the nature of bullying I experienced was thankfully not like what Eminem experienced with getting beaten up every single day. Instead, at a selective high school, the bullying is of a more social and a more psychological nature. Things like socially isolating you from the group, trying to put you down or embarrass you in public. So these kind of mind games as such. Also, I remember there were times where they would try to exclude me from group tasks, so I would get a lower mark on the assessment as such. And there was even one story I remember where a few of the really naughty kids set up their own site with all these Photoshop images of different students for cyberbullying. And this was before YouTube was really big as well, or Facebook was really massive. So in any case, that's not what this video is about. What this video is about is my greatest fear of a particular chess opening that whenever I faced this line, I seemed to have real headaches dealing with it, and I had more losses against lower-rated junior players or lower-rated players in general in this opening than virtually any other. And when the coaches started to pick up on it, I kept facing this line time after time like this nightmare that would never end. And that line is e4. So this is a line that was played against me when I was playing with black. So I would try to play my Sveshnikov Sicilian that I was really good at and had a great expertise in. But then they would not play the move d4 and let me play my Sveshnikov, which for those of you who don't know, the Sveshnikov is with takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now e5. So a very reliable system that's actually one of the main defenses to e4 of players like Magnus Carlsen and also some others, but Carlsen's the leading champion of the present day. But instead they would avoid my Sveshnikov with the Rossolimo, bishop b5. And the thing is, the Rossolimo is so darn easy to play, because in so many lines white can simply castle short, play c3, then d4, and simply take over the center. But not only that, but there's another idea behind the Rossolimo as well, where white can also play a move like bishop takes c6, doubling the pawns and leaving black with a much less flexible structure, whichever way he decides to recapture toward the center or away from the center. Now, I do have a recent game to share with you as well that shows very clearly what white's ideas are, but I'd also like to share some of my own experiences of exactly the lines where I struggled, so that you can use them to defeat your fellow club player or expert opponents, or conversely, you can learn the easy way from my experiences so that you know what to do instead to deal with my greatest fear as a teenager, the Rossolimo. In fact, it was even my greatest fear as an adult until I started playing things other than 1c5, where I thought, the Rossolimo is so annoying, let's just play 1e5, 1e6, or 1c6 to avoid bishop b5. Well, I guess 1e5 doesn't quite avoid bishop b5, but you get the idea. Anyway, the game went g6, and this is the way that I usually played it as well. It is true I did try some other things in my adult years, but g6 was a move I was pretty loyal to because it was recommended in the book Annie Sicilians, A Guide for Black by Dorian Rogosenko. This book was published in 2003, but I noticed that because this was quite a trendy opening, played a lot at the highest level, and in fact bishop b5 is more common than the open Sicilian at the top level nowadays as well. Well, it meant that the fear was moving much faster and had moved on from the book, so the lines I was learning in my book weren't really up to date by the time I was playing against these prepared junior players. Anyway, after g6, there were two lines that were kind of annoying for me. One of them was bishop takes c6, and I'll get to that one a little bit later, because that's what was played in this game between Leia Garofalina against Xenia Corrales Jimenez, again in the FIDE Women's World Cup in round 2, so a very recent game. So, in any case, actually I think it might have been played in round 1 in fact. Yeah, this was a game played in round 1, I stand corrected. But anyway, the other system that really annoyed me a lot was the system where they played castles, bishop to g7, and then this move of c3 was one that gave me a lot of headaches. And the idea of c3 is simple, just to play d4 and completely dominate the center. We see it if black goes cd4, that white's not going to take back with the knight like in an open Sicilian, but he's going to play c takes d4 and have those two pawns beautifully side by side in the center. So I knew from the Rossolimo book that knight f6 was the main move. Granted, nowadays there have been some recent games where I actually played the move e5, which is quite a reasonable move objectively, but it does require you to know what you're doing in these positions after d4, where black ends up winning a pawn, but after bishop f4, white gets this bishop to d6, and actually gets quite good compensation for the pawn. The computers say that black can equalize, but it's a line where you have to be quite well prepared, where after something like a6, bishop to a4, knight e7, this position is not exactly a straightforward position. b5, bishop b3, bishop b7. Still, there's a lot that can happen in very unclear and very messy position, where white has a lot of natural attacking ideas, whereas black has to still be quite precise in order to maintain the balance. So in order to avoid this e5 sack, or rather this d4 sack against e5, I played the move knight to f6 following Rossolimo's recommendation. I noticed that against moves like e5 or some more slow approaches, I tended to be quite happy, but most of my opponents simply played the move rook to e1. And the reason that rook e1 I think is the most critical move here and the most unpleasant for black is, let's say we compare this to an Alpen Sicilian with c3. One reason that a Rossolimo is in some ways an improved version of Alpen Sicilian is because after the immediate c3, black will go knight to f6, and white doesn't have this rook e1 move to defend the pawn, so white would need to go e5, but then black gets a much improved Alpen defense where these moves are being thrown in, but that means that it's much harder to effectively attack that knight on c4. And if you play d4, black can simply take, and if white takes back, we kind of see black's idea that he has a very nice outpost for the knight on d5. If you had these pawns on the starting squares, then white would be able to kick that knight away and get a nice advantage in the Alpen. But with the c-pawns traded, it shifts it from being slightly better for white to being just completely fine for black. Knight c6, and there's a lot more theory, but basically the idea is at some moment you'll take on e5, kind of eliminate their strong center and equalize in that way. So going back to this position here, we can see that, well, I don't have this option of meeting e5 with knight d5, or rather I do, but white has chosen not to play e5, but to put the pawns side by side in the center. And it's not something that black can really avoid, so I would castle, they would play d4 and take the center, I would play d5 and then meet e5 with knight e4. And I remember there was this move that I kept facing from players, well, people who are watching this YouTube channel won't really know them unless they were playing the same tournaments as me as a kid, but players like William Shu, David Webster, these players would beat me, I think more than once in this variation, and they're lower rated than me, but in this particular line they just, you got to give me all kinds of headaches. And there are probably some other players who have beaten me in these lines I'm forgetting, but those are the main experience I remember as being very unpleasant. I remember that they played this move at knight b to d2, which was really annoying for me because I knew that this move wasn't meant to be particularly good for white, but every time they played it I kept forgetting why it was meant to be not so great. And I remember I played moves like bishop f5 in one game, and I kind of got into a difficult position. I think I had another game where I took on d4, and then I played something like knight d2, and I just ended up suffering against this space advantage. The correct move for black, though, is... Actually, before I give it away, I want to see if you guys can come up with the move. What would you play here if you were black? Okay, the reason knight d2 is not the most precise is that the move queen b6 is really good. And what I would keep forgetting in the game is, well, after bishop c6, can't they just try and win a pawn with something like knight takes e4? This is what I was really nervous about in my games as a 1800 rated player, that I'd have some move like knight g5 or d5, and they would simply try to win my pawn and I'd be a pawn down for nothing facing the strong center. But in reality, it's actually not a problem, because if they do play d5, I can just play queen to c4, and when they move their knight away, it's going to leave their e5 pawn undefended, so I'm not going to lose the pawn, it'll just be an exchange of pawns. And then I'm still going to have my bishop pair advantage, bishop e5, rook e4, queen c7, and it's just a much improved Grundfeld where black has the bishop pair. The d pawn is isolated, and if anyone's better here, it's probably black. Though objectively the position is probably still close to equal after knight f3 and the game goes on. Also, if white were to play knight g5, which I think was the move I was more worried about, it turns out you can just let them take the pawn with rook d8, because if they play knight takes e4, you just play bishop takes e5, and you simply have this massive pressure against the IQP, and bishop pair, lead in development, everything you could dream of in a chess game. Or if they play a move like rook takes e4 here, well then you just play the move h6, and they end up losing a piece, because if the knight moves away, it would leave the rook undefended as such. So that is what I didn't see as an 1800 player. Like, I would just keep forgetting this or just not figure it out over the board, and would end up in all sorts of headaches. Actually, the more unpleasant move is for white to play a move like bishop to e3. It's true you could also play bishop takes c6 and then bishop e3. This is the modern approach that's thought to give white the better side of equality. The idea of putting the bishop on e3 is that when black does take on d4, which they're not forced to immediately, but usually they will at some point, well, the idea is that now the bishop is holding back the c5 break. Obviously, in this structure, the c6 pawn is a backward pawn, the a7 pawn is isolated, and if white can position his pieces to attack c6 or to blockade that knight on c5 and outpost knight, that would be very unpleasant for black. And of course, black can try to create counterplay, but white does have this very safe position where it can squeeze for a positional edge at very little risk. Incidentally, this is the line that I also recommended in my course, Attacking the Sicilian, which you can check the link in the description if you want to invest in that course to master this Grandmaster repertoire on a much deeper level than is possible in this one video here. In any case, that gives you a bit of an idea of my experience, and also this line is a little bit annoying for black. So it turns out that my concerns I had weren't just that I didn't understand what I was doing, but actually, practically speaking, these lines are quite difficult. And actually, in 2010, I actually started playing the Rossolimo with the white pieces, and I was amazed at how easily I was able to outplay my opponents in this line, that whenever I played a lower-rate player, I almost always seemed to get more time on the clock and an advantage out of the opening, and my moves are just so easy to play just by using standard plans. So in any case, that's a little bit of the story of the line with g6 if white were to castle. And of course, black has other moves like e6 is another possibility. The move d6 is also a move, though it doesn't have that great of a reputation. You can play in a kind of Roy Lopez fashion and claim a small advantage in those lines. I'm not going to go deeper into it, otherwise the video will be a bit too long. Well, the game saw g6, and now we see the other approach for white. If castles and c3 is the more direct approach, then bishop takes c6 is a more positional approach. And in the game, Corrales Jimenez played the move d takes c6, which is also the approach that I was playing as a junior, again following the recommendation of Dorian Rogozenko in Annie Cillian's A Guide for Black. Also, when I was playing this as a junior, dc6 was kind of more solid and a more trendy approach than the approach with b takes c6, which I knew as an approach that existed, but I didn't really start playing it until 2007, where I just got so frustrated with losing with dc6 over and over that I decided to change my repertoire and play this more dynamic approach of recapturing toward the center. And I want to talk a little bit about my experiences here before moving on to the game's d takes c6, because I did find ultimately this solution to my Rossolimo problem in finding that the bc6 positions were a much better fit for my style. Castles is the usual move. There are a couple of blitz games I played where moves like d4 gave me some slight headaches, but objectively it's not really a problem, even if you play c takes d4. And then you play f6, like this is one way to play it, where you can sort of have a very meaty position, though it might be true that white has a bit of a tiny edge here. So maybe in retrospect it's a little more precise to play bishop to a6 instead, saying that if they go dc5, that should be d takes c5, not pawn to d5. Well, in this case, you get this position after queen a5, and even here as well, actually, white is probably a little bit better as well, because of the fact that black is losing a lot of time taking back the pawn, and white can kind of, well, even though he can't castle yet, he can play moves like a3 and sort of shut out the bishop with queen c5, c4. And I mean, bishop c4 is running into a queen c2 pin, which is definitely not ideal, but otherwise white can play moves like castles, b4, and just have a very pleasant space advantage. So we can see that d4 might actually be, in some ways, the most unpleasant move in some senses for black, if black is not fully prepared for it. I'm not aware of a line where black is achieving 100% equality. It feels practically easier to play white. But I think the same is probably true of the move castles as well. And after bishop g7, white usually plays rook e1. And I want to share a little bit of history of my own experience, which will also reflect the development of the fear of this line. So when I started out playing this line in 2007, I knew of this setup where you played a move knight to h6, not playing knight f6 in fear of the e5 and the knight getting kicked around in the center. And then the way they would usually play it would be something like c3, castles, and then some move like h3, just trying to not allow the knight or the bishop to come to g4 later. Because if you play a move like d4, I kind of realized at a later stage in my career, after researching the line in 2017, I realized that the positions after cd4, cd4, and d5 are actually quite decent for black, where he managed to trade off his doubled pawn, stake a foothold in the center. And after e5 and f6, there is a lot more fury. I did have a game against Narayanan in the 2018 Gold Coast Open, where he played this tricky queen c2 shortcut and got an advantage against me. It did take me by surprise quite a bit as well, but the game did eventually end in a draw. It's a position where modern Indians actually think that white does have a small edge, so we can see that even here, knight h6 is not a complete solution, even when black does get his idea in. But back in 2007, the main line was to meet h3, not with the move f5 or d5 that are the main lines nowadays and have sort of built up their own body of fury where black is thought to be doing okay. But the approach was to play f6. This is what was the popular approach, going d4. And playing this position like with d6 where you give white the space advantage, they've got more space and a more harmonious looking position. But you kind of say, I've got the bishop pair, my structure is flexible and I can choose where to play for e5 or f5 or d5 or c5 in the middle game. So it's a structure where in theory you have a lot of scope to outplay your opponent. But in reality, if white just plays a move like b3 or even bishop d2, it turns out that white is just significantly better here. The black doesn't really manage to get good counterplay, and so I found that these positions were also not so pleasant and I wasn't really happy playing them. But then eventually I came up with a solution, and that's what I want to share with you guys as the solution to my greatest fear. And that is first I started playing the move knight f6, which I did admittedly sort of mention earlier that it runs into e5. But it's not the end of the story. It turns out that I have had quite good results with this position in blitz, just playing knight c7. And then after something like d4, for example, just taking. And I found that these positions with knight e6 were sort of ones I was doing quite okay. And I mean, I do think that white is probably a little bit better, or at least practically his position is easier to play after something like takes, and knight c3, which is probably the reason why I don't see this at a high level anymore, because white does have a tiny bit of practical pressure. Though the engine will tell you that with moves like h5, which is kind of trying to stop castles, bishop h6 and trading the bishop pair, that in this way you can apparently maintain the balance, that it does require some quite precise play to prove it. So practically it wasn't a complete solution for me. And the computer actually thinks that the move knight c3 and then playing d4 is an even better move order. I think the idea of this is that if they castle it, you want to play d4 and sort of make the argument that you've got a better version of the normal lines, because now after knight e6 and queen h4, you've got bishop h6, and they're not really able to stop it as easily. Like h5 doesn't really make as much sense when your king is already castled on this side of the board, and white kind of just keeps a very good grip over the central dark squares, so this bishop doesn't really get into the game, and white keeps a nice space advantage. So knight f6 wasn't really a long-term solution. I had a couple of good games with it, but I realized that it's not something I could play forever. So ultimately, the line I kind of settled on for black, and which is my current preference, and I've had very good results with, by the way, is the move of queen to c7. So what is the idea of queen c7? Well, we've kind of seen that the knight h6 line is not really equalizing. We've seen knight f6 is not really equalizing. So queen c7 is basically a useful waiting move where we say to white, okay, I'm going to wait for you to choose your setup at this point, whether you're playing h3, c3, d3 or something else. And then based on the information you give me, I'm going to adapt my setup so that your move you played is not going to be appropriate anymore. So how does that work in practice? Well, if white were to play c3, we now play the move of d6. And d6 is a move that, would not be so effective if white could go e5 quickly, but white's not in position to do that here because we covered it with queen c7. And after a move such as, let's say, d4, well, black can simply take, undouble the pawns. And now after knight f6, we see that the knight is a lot better on f6 than it was on the edge of the board on h6 or stuck passively on f7. you're not really worried about e5 because that gives you the d5 outpost for the knight. And after something like, let's say, knight to c3, castles, and a move like h3, for example, to stop bishop g4, well, you can simply play c5, and it turns out that either you trade these pawns and get a very decent open Sicilian structure, where you're going to get good counterplay with the bishop pair and the open files for your rooks, or if they play a move like d5, you just get a very nice Benko or Benoni structure, or Benko structure technically, where you've got the bishop pair and you just have this very good counterplay down the open b file and down the long diagonal, and the bishop pair is not a bad added bonus for black either. Of course, white has other ways to play it, but if they go h3 here, I mean, d6 still works well. You know, white is not limited to playing c3, and they can try moves like knight a3 and try to get some e5, some engine ideas like this, but it's honestly not that scary, like rook b8, and I mean, once they defend the pawn, you can even often play moves such as, for example, e5 and knight e7, and sort of take advantage of the fact that normally the best response to e5 is to go c3 and d4, but when you play d3 already, that's going to take an extra tempo, and that's the extra tempo that black needs to basically equalize in this sort of structure. And if white doesn't play for d4, then black will go f5 and just start taking the initiative himself on the king side, kind of in the style of the King's Indian, but where you have the bishop pair to boot, and where white's not getting his usual queenside attack with c4, c5, and so forth. And if they do play d3, then yeah, again, just e5, and the same idea I showed is going to work pretty well here. So that's my current solution to queen c7. The computers do think that white is still a tiny bit better in these lines with correct play, so admittedly I have to admit that I think that the move bishop b5 does give white a small advantage with correct play, so I have to be honest and say that knight c6 on a hyper-theoretical level is a slight inaccuracy, and that if black wants to equalize, he should probably play d6 with the intent of the open Sicilian. But for 99% of you watching this is not really going to be important. This is only really significant when you get to the super grandmaster level. If you like the positions after knight c6 better, then by all means play them, because a plus 0.25 advantage versus a plus 0.05 is not really going to be significant for the vast majority of players, especially human players. So anyway, we can sort of see it. There's no perfect solution to Rossolimo, but it's the best I've been able to come up with so far. After bishop takes c6, I've not really ever been a fan of the dc6 structure, and this game is kind of going to show why. I think that it's very difficult to play these positions as black without some very deep preparation. So after d3, bishop g7, we see a very nice move of h3. The idea of h3 is just to kill black's unopposed bishop. We see it by putting the pawns on the light squares like this, that we don't give the black bishop on c8 a good square to go to. So black develops normally with knight f6. And after knight c3, I remember that Rogozhenko's main recommendation was the move of knight d7, which is the move that Corrales Jimenez played in the game. But later on, I also saw that Rogozhenko was recommending the move castles, and he kind of said that the move castles he felt was sort of a line that was sort of trendier at the time in 2003 and had a better reputation. So I started playing this line with castles in some games as well for a little bit of variety, trying to get a more sharp position after bishop e3, b6, queen d2, and e5, where you can have this opposite side castling and very dynamic play, which kind of appealed to me at the time. But then I remember in 2007, I had this game against Eugene Schon, which kind of changed my outlook on the line and made me realize that it wasn't something I really liked, where Schon, with the help of his coach, prepared this move of bishop h6, and I thought, okay, I play queen d6 and white has nothing special. I can't remember exactly how the game went, but after castles and b5, he came up with this very creative idea that I wasn't really familiar with at the time, where he played this move at knight h2, with the idea of playing knight g4, and basically so that if I take, then he gets this nice open h-file attack with this trade. And objectively speaking, it's probably not that scary, and it's still probably about equal, but I handle it very poorly, and I went for some bishop e6, b4, just some very reckless and way too ambitious idea of trying to grab the pawn a2, which is absolutely not a good idea here. Granted, the computer will tell you that you can just play knight to h5, meet knight g4 with some move like f6, or say bishop takes h6 and then f6, and it will say white has no attack here and the position is just completely fine, which is true, and I guess it shows I hadn't really kept up with the theory as well as I should have in these games. But also by playing the same thing over and over, it also made me a bit of a sitting duck for preparation at these Australian juniors tournaments. So basically, yeah, in this case, obviously this line objectively is probably okay, but I don't think that it was that great a stylistic fit to kind of defend somewhat passively against the white attack. So later on I realized, okay, I don't really like this sort of line. I did also try the knight d7 approach that we see in this game. I will point out, by the way, after castles, that there are other moves. For example, the move castles is kind of the modern trend at a high level, where these positions are thought to be a little bit better for white. Kind of the idea is that if black goes knight d7, then you can play bishop e3, e5, and, well, you can actually play a similar plan to what we'll see in the main game, but you also have other plans like trying to play for b4 and try to open lines on the queen side, which is often a decent plan B in these structures. Well, black played knight d7, which is historically the main line. White played bishop e3, e5. So this is the Garofalina game from the World Cup. And I remember that Rogozenko's main line in his book was to play queen e7, but he kind of admitted that the line with bishop h6 is a little bit better for white, as white is able to trade off the black bishop pair, which is black's main advantage in his position long term. So after something like f6, white just gets a very pleasant advantage, where if black can get some maneuver like a knight to d4, then his position is probably okay. But white can play this move queen e3 that just stops this knight maneuver. And if black does play some move like queen e7, well, that's already a third move with the queen. And if you play b6 instead, then you're kind of asking for either a4 and sort of trying to provoke a5, so that you can then go for knight d2 and try to either pressure the pawn on b6 in this way, which is a bit annoying, or simply play f4 and just kind of weaken that black center even more. We see it in this position, white has all the pawn breaks and black is merely reacting, which is definitely not very pleasant on a practical level here. So this was something I thought, I don't really want to allow this sort of thing. So at some point I was considering, well, maybe I want to play the move h6. And I think that I dabbled with this in a couple of games, mainly in online blitz. But again, I faced the issue that white's moves were just so easy to play. The idea of h6, by the way, is that it stops the move bishop h6, so it allows black to play either queen e7 or a move like b6 without having to contend with bishop takes h6. But unfortunately, white is not limited to the plan of a3 and b4, which can be quite a good plan if black does commit too much to the king side. Then that can be a nice way to open up the a file and try to put some pressure on the a7 pawn later. It does entail that doubling the black pawns, which is not the end of the world, but it is true that the knight h2 approach that Garofalina played is the better one here. Because if you play a move like g5 to try stop f4, you're also weakening the light squares a lot, which is not really ideal. It just takes all the flexibility out of black's structure. So black played a move knight f8 in the game. White played the natural move f4. The computer thinks that you could also throw in a4, a5, but I think it's not so human. Definitely it's more natural to go and trade off black's one remaining pawn. And we kind of see here after bishop f4 why white is a little bit better, because white has the much more flexible structure. Black doesn't have any real pawn break due to the double pawns. And these bishops are just not really doing that much when white has such a flexible position. After knight to e6, the Indians actually prefer the move bishop to e3. The idea is that you're not allowing black to castle so easily, because you can then play bishop takes h6. Now granted there are other moves for black, but if you play knight d4, white can play moves like e5. And this is a very thematic idea for white that, well, the point is that it's generally too risky for black to go bishop e5 when the black king is still in the center. But if you try to just play around the pawn, let's say you play a move like bishop e6, for example, white can just go rook a1 and just keep on developing up something like knight f5 and bishop to f2. White's just going to play knight f3, knight e4, and just kind of hit these weak dark squares. Even the knight can be kicked away with g4 as well if needed. So white just gets a very nice initiative, and the engine at a very high depth says that this is 0-0-0, but I think that any human would much prefer to play white in this kind of position, because white has all of the options here and black is mainly reacting. In any case, the game saw bishop e g3 instead, which is a move that practically scores quite well for white, and certainly in the game white quickly got a close to winning position. But I think that it's objectively not quite as precise, because I think that the move queen g5 would have been a better move for black, because I mean the trade of queens is well in black's best interest, because it helps you improve the structure by activating your rook. It also means that after a trade of queens you can also go knight d4, and it means that c2 pawn will be under fire. In this variation, black's main idea is to put the knight on d4, so that pawn on c2 can come under some pressure. And it's also like a semi-outpost, because c3, even if white gets it in, it kind of makes the structure that bit less flexible. So in the game, white instead, black didn't play queen g5. I mean, white can still play queen e1, but after knight d4, queen f2 and castles, black's sort of doing okay. Like once a knight gets to d4, I think that black is more or less equalizing at this stage. But instead, black played knight d4 immediately, and that turns out to be a lot less precise. After rook a1, a key point is that now, if black were to play castles, which is probably the most natural looking move, well, what do you think is the key idea for white to make the most of her extra piece on the dark squares? After all, black has a light squared bishop, but we have one more knight to fight for the control over the dark squares. So how do we make use of it here with white to play? So the answer is that the move e5 is the key. And the idea of e5, as we've seen before, is to clear e4 for the knight, so that we can either jump into d6 outpost, or jump into f6 and leave that black king very weak and exposed. And if knight f5, we just again play bishop f2. We can still put our knight to f3, our knight on e4, kick the knight away with g4 so that our bishop can come in. And however black plays this, he's going to have some kind of weakness. Even if you play a move like f6, trying to trade off that pawn, well, you're still running into moves like ef6. And even there, the black king is still quite exposed, and white's going to have a bit of an initiative to work with. Though admittedly, it would only be a small advantage for white, so the game would continue from here. But instead, black realized, well, it would be nice if I could castle long in this position, away from this coming attack. So black tried the move queen e7 here, and unfortunately this move is not that great, because you can still play e5, and even then knight e4 is still going to be a problem, even if black does try to castle long. In the game, white went for a more direct approach that is also pretty decent. She played a really great tactic of knight to d5. Well done if you saw that this move was possible, and it's probably actually nearly as strong as the move e5 in all fairness. After cd5, which is the only move because you're not just hitting the queen, but you're also threatening a knight c7 fork, so black is forced to take. And after e takes, we see how effective it is to have the rook opposite the queen, especially when the black king is still uncastled, because black has to block this attack somehow. She played knight to e6. And white just continued building up the pressure. She played the move of knight to g4, which is quite a clever move, sort of keeping d6 in reserve. Because sometimes by keeping your options open like this, you give the opponent more moves. They can't just play an automatic bishop e6 and know what their next move will be. We kind of keep the options open, and that gives black more chance to go wrong. And go wrong she did. I think that the best move for black is probably just to admit that things have gone wrong and play the move castles. And yeah, it's not great. After d takes e6, bishop e6, knight takes h6. It is true that white has won a pawn after knight to g4. The move like bishop takes b2 would just be suicidal, because you're running in a queen h6, or even a move like c3 is just completely shutting the bishop out of the defense of the dark squares here. So that's no bueno for black. But still, with the bishop pair, you can say that you have some small drawing chances. It's not like black is completely dead and buried yet. But instead, she played queen g5, and unfortunately, the ending is just not really playable for black. After queen takes g5, hg5, white found a really great move in this position, and okay, you could play d takes e6 first, which is probably even more precise, but white played a move bishop e5 instead, realizing that, well, we get rid of the bishop pair, and this knight is not really going anywhere anyway. Black played a move bishop takes e5, and after knight takes e5, what we see here is that unfortunately black is not able to move her knight to safety, because if the knight does retreat, say to c7, white can simply take on f7 or g6, discover check, and we'll just take the rook on the next move. Remember, we can't castle out of a check, guys. Black instead played a move rook h7, but for what it's worth, probably castling is the best try. But I mean, after d6, white is still going to have a similar tactic to win the game, where we see the f7 pawn is a little bit overloaded at the moment. So well done if you spot that the move knight takes g6 is a safe pawn grab here. Rook e8, knight e5, and a beautiful point is that, well, they can't play bishop a2 because b3 and the bishop just gets trapped. So that would be a Fischer-esque poison pawn there. But otherwise, white is just a pawn up for absolutely nothing. Instead, the game went rook h7, and after d takes e6, bishop takes e6, white found a decisive tactic, knight takes f7, realizing that black is not in a position to take with the bishop because of the pin. And after rook f7, rook takes e6, rook e7, rook takes g6, king to d7, rook g5. White is up 3 pawns at this point, so the remaining 14 moves we have played are not really of interest to me. White went on to win very easily from this stage. So there you have it. That's my greatest fear, is the Rossolimo. But that fear actually, much like Batman with his fear of bats, turned into, his sort of identity and made him stronger. In much the same way the Rossolimo turned into one of my most effective weapons, with which I have a very high score. I think around something like 80 to 85% in my over-the-board and in my online games, against some quite good opponents as well. So it's definitely an opening that I have very, very good results with the white pieces, and if I knew my opponents were going to play c5, knight c6 every time, then yeah, I would probably play e4 virtually every game until I got sick of just winning too easily or something. But yeah, it's an annoying system, and it's true that I have done my best to show you some systems you can investigate with g6, where you can try to not to repeat the mistakes I made, and maybe try some different systems I didn't know when I was a junior. Things like the e5 system, which is actually quite respectable, especially if you're able to get in your Botvinnik formation, then your position does end up being quite harmonious there. And also showing you some other ideas like the lines with bc6 and queen to c7, which is what I would probably recommend nowadays as the best try to equalize for black. It doesn't fully equalize, but it gives you a fighting position where if you're the stronger player, you have very good chances to win the game. And, well, at least it sets some practical problems where white can't just play some purely formulaic approach to get a slight edge like we saw in some of the other lines. So yeah, that's my greatest fear, the Rossolimo Sicilian. What is your greatest chess fear? I'd love to find out in the comments. Also, since you have made this video to the end, congratulations. Do show your support with that like button, and also consider subscribing if you are new to the channel. In any case, guys, that's all I have to share about my greatest fear for now. So see you in the next video. Get out of here.